Open in prayer. Lord, guide my lips and my words, so that they are pleasing to you, our strength and our Redeemer. Good morning, everyone. We're now beginning the final series of the book of Daniel. And when I last spoke to you, Daniel had just been taken hostage by Nebuchadnezzar. Since then, 66 years has elapsed, and up until this time, Daniel had served under 5 kings and is now in his 80s, and I would assume probably semi-retired. The Babylon Empire now continued under the command of King Nabonidus, and with Belshazzar, his son, they co-reigned. Historians found evidence that the king lived in Arabia and left the conduct of the kingdom of Babylon to his eldest son, whilst Nabonidus concentrated on reopening trade routes and Belshazzar in charge of the city. So let me set the scene. On this particular evening outside the city walls, 2 great armies, the Medes and the Persians, were looking for a way into this strongly defended city, ready to attack. But where was Belshazzar? He was surrounded by a hostile army. He was so confident that the greatly fortified walls of Babylon would withstand any army. He also knew that within the city they had access to water and enough food to last the siege for over a year or more. So what was he doing? He was hosting a large feast with all his nobles, wives, and his concubines. Daniel tells us that the king had drunk so much that he was foolish and arrogant enough to not only lose all semblance of control, perhaps to boost his and their morale because of the army outside the walls, that he demanded his servants to bring him the sacred gold and silver cups that had been stolen from the house of the Lord in Jerusalem by his predecessor Nebuchadnezzar. And then they proceeded to drink from these cups whilst praising their own idols made of gold, silver, bronze, iron, wood and stone. Author John Trapp writes, Belshazzar did not realise by his actions that he was committing the sin of sacrilege by openly mocking God. Babylon was a great and powerful city, but it was also filled with horrible sin, idolatry, witchcraft, and temple immorality. Babylon was and remains a symbol of all that stands against God. However, we know that God does communicate to man in unexpected and unusual ways. Moses and the burning bush, the tablets of stone written by God. Elijah experienced a still small voice in the wind, and Joseph with his dreams. But what happened next was to set Babylon on a new path and change its history. Last week, Matthew led us through our Remembrance Sunday service, a time when we think about all those who died during the 2 great wars and other conflicts. And we do this every year, not to glorify war, but to remind us what those men, women, and also civilians suffered and died for, our freedom. And the term lest we forget, is aptly used at this time. Now, the problem with Belshazzar was he was either indifferent or had forgotten the information God had given King Nebuchadnezzar in his dream, which we read in Daniel 2. The warning given that Babylon would be replaced by the Medo-Persian Empire. In Belshazzar's arrogance and false confidence, he was denying the will of God. In Isaiah 21, it tells us the vision given to him by the Lord. This message came to me concerning Babylon, the desert by the sea. Disaster is roaring down on you from the desert, like a whirlwind sweeping in from the Negev. I see a terrifying vision. I see the betrayer betraying, the destroyer destroying. Go ahead, you Elamites and Medes, attack and lay siege. I will make an end to all the groaning Babylon has caused. Look, they're preparing a great feast. They are spreading rugs for people to sit on. Everyone is eating and drinking. Be quick, grab your shields and prepare for battle. You are being attacked. This Medo-Persian Empire was the army knocking at the door. God was still working his plan. During this feast, Belshazzar was confronted by a strange phenomenon. He saw human fingers writing on the wall in front of him, and we are told he was terrified. His face turned ashen, his knees knocked so badly that his legs gave way. Daniel's vivid description shows us that Belshazzar's whole countenance changed. It also shows us that his carefree partying was so shallow that it turned from merriment to being terrified in a moment. Did his conscience prick? Because there in front of him, God's anger had become legible, but not to him. Once again, we see history repeat itself. Belshazzar did not remember past history of his predecessor's reign and called for enchanters, astrologers, fortune tellers, supposedly wise men to interpret the meaning of the writing on the wall. And they were offered all manner of incentives. Although the writing on the wall was written in Aramaic, a language understood by the Babylonians, these men could not determine its prophetic significance, because God gave Daniel alone the ability to interpret God's word in the message. There was, however, one person who, when she heard what happened at the feast, rushed to the king's side to remind him of Belshazzar, who had the Spirit of God and a God-given ability to explain and interpret God's word. But this old queen called him by his Jewish name, Daniel, out of respect of his faith and past background history. Daniel was called for and was also offered many great rewards. But Daniel's loyalty was always to God, never for status or for money. Firstly, Daniel brooks no argument. He boldly reminds the king that it was God who gave Nebuchadnezzar power to rule, and how during his reign God had brought him low. Nebuchadnezzar learnt that the Most High God rules over the kingdoms of the world and appoints anyone he desires to rule over them. You, Daniel accuses, you, his heir, knew this, but have defied the Lord of heaven, have committed sacrilege by drinking from the sacred cups, whilst praising your idols, who neither see, hear, nor know anything at all. Then you dishonour the God who gives you breath of life and controls your destiny. Keep your gifts, or give them to someone else, but I will tell you what the writing on the wall means. The first word, men, means numbered. God has numbered the days of your reign and has brought it to an end. Tekel means weighed. You have been weighed in the balances and have not measured up. Shekel means divided. Your kingdom has been divided and given to the Medes and the Persians. Once again, Daniel showed his courage and faith and trust in God, because Daniel was well aware that often kings would kill the bearers of bad news. Instead, Daniel was robed in purple and given a gold chain, then proclaimed the third highest ruler in the kingdom. However, Daniel knew these honours were to be of no effect. He knew what was coming. The writing on the wall was a message for all those who defy God. So what can we learn in this present age about this piece of history? Who or what is knocking on our door today? Yes, we are in an unusual time, facing a pandemic and back in lockdown, learning to live in a restricted new normal. And so many are worrying about the consequences this has caused to their lives and lifestyles, losing their jobs, homes, worrying about paying bills, children going hungry, people living on the streets, with greed and corruption rife around the world. So many things. Our world appears broken, and some could say that many today have the idea that the best response to the seeming danger of our times is to forget about it and escape into the pursuit of pleasure. But we only have to look at what happened to Belshazzar. He had everything, power, wealth, but his kingdom was corrupt, and he could not withstand the judgment of God. That very night he was killed, and Darius the Mede took over the kingdom. Belshazzar had been numbered, weighed, and then rejected. So what can we do? Author Warren Wiersbe, who wrote a study of Daniel, tells us, be resolute that our first allegiance should be to God. Depend on God alone. To have staying power, like Daniel, who never let anyone or anything keep him from his faith and trust in God. And as Matthew said again last week, we should follow the teachings of Jesus Christ. Thirdly, pray. Our prayers at this time are vital, because we know that God is in the centre of all things. He is working out his plan for us. He is faithful to us, and we should remain faithful to him. Let us not be numbered, weighed, and rejected. Amen.